Hello. You have joined the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board's, or CSB's, public business meeting. We will now begin this meeting with Steve Owens, the chairperson of the CSB.
Well, thank you, Brian, and hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Steve Owens, as Brian said. I'm the chairperson of the Chemical Safety Board. So welcome to our first public meeting of calendar year 2025. Hope you all had a wonderful holiday season and you've gotten the new year off to a great start, like we have here at the CSB. Now that we're in calendar year 2025, we have some important anniversaries coming up. A little over a week from now, it'll have been 3 years since Sylvia Johnson and I first joined the CSB board on February the 3rd, 2022. It also will have been 2 years since Kathy Sandoval joined the board on February 2nd, 2023. And last week marked 2 years since I became the chairperson of the CSB. As you may recall, I became the interim executive of the CSB in late July 2022, after the former chairperson resigned. I was nominated by the president and then confirmed by the Senate to be the new CSB chair, and I began my term as chairperson on January 15th, 2023. This year will mark anniversaries related to several of the many serious incidents investigated by the CSB, as a reminder of the very important work that this agency does. March 23 of this year will mark 20 years since the 2005 explosions at the BP Texas City refinery in Texas City, Texas, where 15 workers were killed, 180 other people were injured, and substantial property damage was done to the refinery and the surrounding area. This is still one of the worst industrial disasters in recent U.S. history. April the 2nd will mark 15 years since the 2010 explosion and fire at the Tesoro refinery in Anacortes, Washington, that fatally injured 7 employees. At the time of the incident, it was the largest fatal accident at a U.S. petroleum refinery since the BP Texas City incident. February 18th will mark 10 years since the 2015 explosion at the ExxonMobil refinery in Torrance, California, that resulted in a major fire at the refinery, 36 injuries, and substantial property damage, as well as a near-miss event when debris from the explosion nearly hit tanks containing highly toxic hydrofluoric acid. In August 27, will mark 5 years since the 2020 catastrophe at the Biolab facility in Westlake, Louisiana, where extreme winds from Hurricane Laura caused millions of dollars in damage at the facility and resulted in a massive fire and large plume of hazardous gases, including toxic chlorine, that put the neighboring community at risk. These and the many other incidents investigated by the CSB over the years underscore the vital work of this agency. And as we look ahead to the coming year, it's also important to recognize how far we have come since Sylvia Johnson, Kathy Sandoval, and I joined the CSB. When I became the interim executive in late July 2022, the CSB had an unacceptable backlog of 17 open investigations that had accumulated under prior agency leadership, some dating as far back as 2016. As I've reported to you before, we completely eliminated the long-standing backlog in December 2023. The CSB issued the last report on the backlog on December 26, 2023. The 17 investigation reports issued by the CSB from July 29, 2022 through December 26, 2023 are the most reports that the agency has ever issued in such a short period, and they represent the CSB's highest level of productivity in its history. In June of last year, the CSB also issued another report, which was not part of the backlog. This was for our investigation of the September 2022 fatal fire at the BP Husky refinery near Toledo, Ohio, which killed 2 employees who were brothers. Counting the BP Husky report, the CSB issued 18 reports in less than 2 years, between July 2022 and June 2024. And the CSB now has 9 current investigations underway. The first of those is the November 2023 fire at the Marathon Renewables facility in Martinez, California, which seriously injured an employee who suffered 3rd-degree burns over most of his face and body, and remarkably, he survived. The second is the explosion and release of highly toxic hydrogen fluoride and chlorine at the Honeywell Performance Materials facility in Geismar, Louisiana, that occurred in January 2023. We're also investigating another release of hydrofluoric acid that occurred on June 7th last year at the Honeywell facility. This incident seriously injured a worker, Both investigations at the Honeywell facility are running concurrently, and the same investigation team is handling both. The fourth is our investigation into multiple explosions at the Dow chemical facility in Plaquemine, Louisiana, in July 23, that resulted in the release of over 31,000 pounds of ethylene oxide, which is a known carcinogen. The incident also resulted in substantial property damage at the facility, and local officials issued a shelter in place for hundreds of nearby residents. As I said at our last public meeting in October, the Dow and Honeywell investigations from incidents in 2023 are a little bit different because we did not have the resources to deploy to those incidents when they initially happened. After we eliminated the longstanding report backlog, however, we began a new effort to conduct on-the-ground investigations into some of the incidents that previously were reported to the CSB under our accidental release reporting rule, but for which we didn't have the capacity to deploy when they occurred. The fifth current investigation we have is the fatal eruption and chemical release at the TSUSA liquid nitriding facility in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that occurred on May 30th of last year and resulted in the death of an employee at the facility. The sixth is the hazardous ammonia release at the Cuisine Solutions facility in Sterling, Virginia, that occurred on July 31 last year and led to the hospitalization of 33 employees. The next is the major chemical fire that began at the biolab facility in Conyers, Georgia, on September 29 last year. Roughly 17,000 people in the community near the facility evacuated due to the fire, and as many as 90,000 others near Atlanta were advised to shelter in place due to the massive toxic plume of dark smoke coming from the fire, which contained chlorine and other hazardous substances. The eighth current investigation is the fatal release of hydrogen sulfide at the Pemex petroleum refinery in Deer Park, Texas, which occurred on October 10 last year. 2 contract workers died as a result of the release. 35 other people were injured and treated at the scene, and an additional 13 workers were transported to local medical facilities. The release also prompted a shelter-in-place order for 2 neighboring cities. And our ninth investigation is the fatal explosion at the Givaudan facility in Louisville, Kentucky, which occurred in November last year. 2 employees were killed and a number of others were injured and taken to local hospitals. The blast also damaged a number of homes and businesses in the area. 7 of these 9 current investigations were initiated during fiscal year 2024, and they are the most investigations initiated by the CSB in a single year in a very long time. And the 9 total current investigations are among the most that the CSB has ever had at any one time. Along with eliminating the report backlog, issuing the BP Husky report, and initiating 9 new investigations, we also released a new safety study last year, which calls for greater use of remote isolation equipment in chemical facilities. This was the first safety study that the CSB had issued since 2011. To sum all this up, we've accomplished a lot over the last 2.5 years. Along with the talented and dedicated career employees at the CSB, each of us on this board is working very hard every day to keep the commitment that we've made to rebuild and revitalize the CSB. And I believe that we can fairly say now that the CSB is one of the most productive and efficient agencies in the federal government today. But while we've accomplished a lot, we've got a lot more to do. So we picked up here at the beginning of 25, right where we left off at the end of 2024. Shortly after New Year, we released our new safety video on the August 2020 fire and toxic gas release at the biolab facility in Louisiana, which I mentioned earlier. We'll show you that video later in this meeting, just in case some of you have not had the opportunity to see it yet. Like all of our other safety videos, the biolab video is posted on the CSB's YouTube page. As of this morning, the video already had been viewed over 225,000 times. And by the way, the CSB's YouTube page now has more than 363,000 subscribers. It's a truly remarkable number, especially for a government agency. And if you're not one of our subscribers, we encourage you to go and sign up today. In addition to releasing the biolab video, we've also expanded upon our commitment to transparency and information sharing. As you know, since July of 2022, the CSB has been making basic public data from the agency's accidental release reporting rule publicly available on the CSB's website. And last week, we took another step forward. On January 14th, we announced our new initiative to give the public more details about the serious chemical incidents that have been reported to the CSB under the reporting rule. We're compiling summaries of reported incidents and making them available to the public on our website. We released volume 1 of the reports last week. This first volume covers 26 chemical incidents in 15 states in California, Colorado, Georgia, Illinois, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Mexico, North Carolina, North Dakota, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. So you can see there are incidents happening all across the country. Together, these incidents resulted in 5 fatalities, 17 serious injuries, and approximately $700 million in property damage. Our team already has been working on volume 2 of the reports, which we anticipate being released soon. The American people have a right to know about the kinds of serious chemical incidents that are happening all across this country every week. And hereafter, resources permitting, we'll be making these reports available to the public on a regular basis. You'll be hearing more about that later in this meeting. But before I turn the floor over to my fellow board members for their remarks, I want to remind everyone that at the end of today's presentations, we'll provide an opportunity for public comments. In the interest of time, we ask that you please keep your comments to 3 minutes, and please use the icon on your screen to raise your hand so that you can be recognized to speak. If you'd like to submit written comments, you can send them to public@csb.gov. That's public, P-U-B-L-I-C, at csb.gov. Now I'd like to turn this over to Board Member Sylvia Johnson for her remarks, and then Board Member Kathy Sandoval. So Sylvia, please go ahead, and Kathy, please do so as well when Sylvia is concluded. And again, thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you, Steve, and hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm honored to welcome you all to the first quarterly board meeting of 2025, and I hope you all had a chance to rest and recharge over the holiday season because the year ahead holds incredible opportunities for progress here at the CSB. It's hard to believe that next month will mark 3 years since I've been a member of the Chemical Safety Board. And I can say that it has been challenging, but it has also been the honor of my life and professional career. I'd also at this time like to take a moment to celebrate the hard work that our chairperson just ran through in terms of the accomplishments of the CSB team since our last board meeting. Today, as the chairperson stated, you will hear about one of our most recent safety products, volume 1 of the incidents reported to the CSB under the accidental release reporting rule. The numbers in this report, this first volume, they're sobering, but they underscore the critical importance of the CSB's work. This report isn't just data, it's a call to action for our stakeholders to continue to prioritize safety, accountability, and proactive measures. You'll also hear updates on some of our ongoing investigations, along with an update on our most recent recommendation status changes. And as the chairperson said, you'll get to see one of our highly regarded safety videos on the August 2020 fire and gas release at the BioLab Lake Charles Chemical Facility in Westlake, Louisiana. All of what you will hear today exemplifies the dedication of the CSB team and our unwavering commitment to our mission to drive chemical safety excellence through independent investigations that protect workers, communities, and the environment. To the CSB staff, whether you're part of investigations, recommendations, board affairs, IT, contracting, HR, or the Office of the General Counsel, you each play a pivotal role, for without your collective efforts, none of this would be possible. The Chemical Safety Board, we're not just investigating incidents, we're championing a culture of safety, prevention, and protection to save lives and communities. Without question, the work of the CSB does just that. It saves lives and will have a lasting impact on workplaces across the nation. In addition to our internal work, we remain committed to engaging with stakeholders who share our vision for chemical safety. In December, the board met with the Coalition to Prevent Chemical Disasters to hear from them and the work they're doing. Most recently, I joined Executive Director Steve Kleiss and Chemical Incident Investigator Bill Steiner at the American Fuel and Petroleum Manufacturers, or AFPM's, Occupational Safety Regional Leadership Network. During this meeting, Investigator Steiner shared key findings from the 2022 BP Husky chemical release and fire investigation, and Executive Director Kleiss provided updates on the Pemex refinery investigation. I also provided a brief update on CSB's activities and reminded those leaders in that room that every incident we investigate underscores one truth: safety is not optional. It's a responsibility that must be shared across industries, communities, and agencies. As we move forward, the CSB's work remains critical, and I'm energized by the possibilities ahead. Progress isn't accidental. It's the result of diligent effort, collaboration, and a steadfast commitment to doing better. Together, we're creating a safer, more secure future for workers, communities, and the environment. I look forward to today's discussions and thank all of you for your ongoing support and commitment. With that, I'll now turn the floor over to my colleague, Kathy Sandoval.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thank you as well to Chairperson Owens. Welcome everybody to the CSB's board meeting, and wanted to give you our best wishes as well for a happy new year and the start of 2025. So as Chairperson Owens and Dr. Johnson have mentioned, the CSB has been very busy working to promote chemical safety through its investigations, recommendations, safety products, and other work. Safety is at the center of all of our work. It's also worth underscoring, as Chairperson Owens mentioned, that at this meeting you'll hear about the CSB's newest analysis of 26 incidents that had been reported through the accidental release event reporting rule since March 2020. And that those events resulted in 5 fatalities, 17 serious injuries, and approximately 700 million in property damage. And this is just illustrative of the stakes of the work that the CSB does and that safety professionals around the country do to try to protect our communities, critical infrastructure, environment, and workers. Shedding light on the causes of those incidents can help the safety work of businesses, private standard-setting bodies, nonprofit organizations, and governments. As you'll hear, and as Chairman Owens mentioned, the CSB is also actively engaged in 9 deployments, investigating chemical safety incidents in a variety of states. You may have also followed some of the CSB's media alerts. In December, we issued an alert reminding operators to prepare for extreme cold weather. We've seen videos of people throwing snowballs in New Orleans and in many other states that don't ordinarily have freezing weather. So with freezing weather affecting much of the US South, fires and high winds in the West, businesses and communities are reminded to prepare for a variety of weather conditions, including potential power outages. In conclusion, I'd like to thank the CSB staff for their work to promote chemical safety. Your work safeguards our nation's critical chemical and petrochemical infrastructure, protects workers, communities, and the environment. So thanks to each and every one of you, and I look forward to our discussions today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, Kathy, for those great opening remarks. Now I'd like to turn the program over to Steve Kleist, our Executive Director of Investigations and Recommendation, for presentations and update on the activities of the office.
Thank you, Chairperson Owens. The Office of Investigations and Recommendations will be making 6 presentations this afternoon to update our audience on the significant accomplishments that have taken place since the last business meeting that was held. The first presentation will focus on the accidental release reporting rule document, the incident report that Chairperson Owens referred to earlier. That presentation will be made by Senior Chemical Incident Investigator Dan Tolima, and he will introduce members of the Accidental Release Reporting Rule Program team for their presentation. So, Mr. Tolima, please proceed.
Thank you, Steve. My name is Dan Tolima, and I will kick off the update on our accidental release program. Could I get the next slide, Brian? This screenshot is from the current version of the spreadsheet on our website. There are 460 accidental release events, which is about 8 events each month. As you can see, serious injury remains the #1 consequence that triggers reporting. Next slide. This graph shows the number of accidental release events monthly, using a 3-month moving average. The frequency of events has been trending downward for the past several months. And last week, we published our first volume of incident reports, providing the public with more information from the accidental release reporting rule. Each incident report provides a summary of the accidental release event and a probable cause statement. We anticipate releasing a new volume of incident reports each quarter. And as the board members stated, Volume 1 covered 26 accidental release events in 15 states. Combined, these events resulted in 5 fatalities, 17 serious injuries, and approximately $700 million in property damage. Next, we have 3 investigators from our accidental release team, who will each review one of the serious events included in the first volume of incident reports. Lisaura Maldonado Pereira will review the fatal toxic gas release on December 19, 2022, at the Home Market Foods facility in Norwood, Massachusetts. Eduardo Alvarez will discuss the fatal flammable liquid release and fire on January 17, 2023, at the Phillips 66 refinery in Borger, Texas. And Owen Tripany will review the fatal chemical reaction, explosion, and fire on May 4, 2023, at the Polycarbon Industries facility in Newburyport, Massachusetts. That concludes my update. Up next is Investigator Lisaura Maldonado Pereira.
Thank you, Dan, and good afternoon to everyone watching us. My name is Lisaura Maldonado Pereira, and I've been an investigator at the CSB for 1 year. Today, I'll provide an overview of the incident at the Home Market Foods facility in Norwood, Massachusetts. On December 19, 2022, at around 11:10 a.m., 22,000 pounds of anhydrous ammonia were accidentally released at the Home Market Foods facility in Norwood, Massachusetts. Exposure to the toxic ammonia vapor fatally injured 1 worker and seriously injured another worker. The release caused $4 million in property damage. This incident happened while 2 contract workers were using a scissor lift to install a comfort heater in the ammonia refrigeration room. While the scissor lift was elevated, it was moved and hit a valve in the ammonia refrigeration system. A leak formed at the ruptured piping connection to the larger ammonia system piping. The anhydrous ammonia engulfed the workers. Worker 1, who was directly in front of the damaged piping, was unable to escape and was fatally injured by the release. Worker 2, who was further away from the leak point, was able to jump over the lift's guardrail and escape from the area. Alarms in the ammonia machine room and throughout the building were activated, alerting workers to evacuate from the facility. Evacuating employees found worker 2 outside the building. Emergency responders recovered worker 1 from the scissor lift and transported worker 2 to a nearby hospital to treat his serious injuries. The CSB determined that the probable cause of the anhydrous ammonia release was piping damage caused from being hit by the scissor lift. That concludes my review of this incident. Up next is investigator Eduardo Alvarez.
Thank you, Lisaura, and hello, everyone. My name is Eduardo Alvarez, and I have been an investigator at the CSB since November of 2023. I will be speaking about the fatal flammable liquid release and fire at the Phillips 66 refinery in Borger, Texas, that occurred on January 17th, 2023. During this incident, 16 barrels of natural gas liquid were accidentally released during the maintenance of a natural gas liquid storage cavern. Flammable hydrocarbon vapor ignited, causing a fire that fatally injured 1 contract worker and seriously injured another. The incident resulted in $3.1 million in property damage. The storage cavern contained a hydrocarbon mixture of mostly propane and butane. Cavern seals were in place for the maintenance work, which prevented any release from the cavern itself. During the maintenance activities, contractors needed to tighten 8 lockdown screws to secure the wellhead. A worker used a battery-operated impact wrench that was inadvertently left in reverse. The lockdown screw was accidentally removed when the worker went to tighten it, resulting in the release of natural gas liquid. The flammable material ignited, injuring 2 workers who were transported to the hospital, where one of the workers succumbed to their burn injuries. When the lockdown screw was removed, the residual natural gas liquid was released from the hydraulic workover unit, referred to as a snubbing unit. At the time of the incident, the pressure in the snubbing unit was 400 pounds per square inch gauge. After the incident, Phillips 66 created action items to require using hand tools to adjust lockdown screws on cabin wellheads and establishing risk management practices to vent pressure from the snubbing unit to the flare system. The CSB determined the probable cause of the accidental release of natural gas liquid was the inadvertent removal of a lockdown screw from the wellhead. Contributing to the incident was the use of a battery-operated impact wrench and the presence of pressurized natural gas liquid in the snubbing unit. That concludes my update on the Phillips 66 accidental release event. Up next is Investigator Owen Tripany.
Thank you, Eduardo. Good afternoon. I'm Owen Tripany, and I've been an investigator at the CSB for 16 months. I will be talking about the explosion that occurred at Polycarbon Industries, or PCI Synthesis. On May 4th, 2023, a pressure filter vessel exploded at the Polycarbon Industries, or PCI, facility in Newburyport, Massachusetts. The explosion and fire fatally injured 1 PCI operator and caused $48 million in property damage, ultimately causing the facility to permanently shut down. At the time of the incident, PCI was making Decon. The Decon involved in the incident had already been produced and was being dried in the filter vessel. PCI used an agitator in the drying vessel to improve the drying rate and keep the dried product smooth. In post-incident testing, PCI found that Decon could undergo exothermic, self-accelerating decomposition when it reached 280 degrees Fahrenheit. PCI also learned that when Decon decomposes, it releases flammable gases including hydrogen, methane, and carbon monoxide. Leading up to the incident, the agitator had loosened and began rubbing a plate at the bottom of the filter dryer vessel, which generated heat from friction. The friction likely caused a hot spot in the Decon that reached the temperature necessary for Decon to decompose. The decomposition reaction generated more heat, which increased the temperature of Decon in the vessel and caused more Decon to decompose. The gases produced by the reaction rapidly increased the pressure within the vessel, causing the vessel's discharge door to open. The flammable gases and Decon dust were released. Upon release, the flammable materials mixed with the air, ignited, and exploded. As the Decon continued to decompose, the pressure inside the vessel increased, causing a rupture disk to open and ultimately total failure of the vessel. The vessel failure created a second, larger explosion. 1 PCI employee was unable to escape and was fatally injured. The CSB determined that the probable cause of the incident was a self-accelerating decomposition reaction of Decon, which produced flammable gases and released combustible Decon dust that ignited. Contributing to the incident was PCI's incomplete knowledge of the hazards associated with Decon, including its ability to undergo a reaction capable of rupturing the drying vessel. This concludes the accidental release team update. Thank you. Back to Executive Director Kleist.
Thank you, Owen, and thank you to the other presenters regarding the accidental release incident reporting team. Appreciate the fine work that you've done to make us aware of the facts, circumstances, and conditions of these incidents that you described. The next series of presentations will focus on investigation updates that have been issued by the CSB since our last business meeting. The first investigation update will be on the Cuisine Solutions incident. The investigator in charge, Melinda Hartz, will be making the presentation. Melinda, please proceed.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon. This is the investigation update summary for the Cuisine Solutions and hydrous ammonia release that the CSB is currently investigating. I'm Melinda Hartz, although I'm not being shown. Investigator in charge for Cuisine Solutions investigation. Oh, thank you, Brian. Cuisine Solutions produces cooked, packaged food products for hotels, airlines, restaurants, and consumers. It has a refrigeration system to control chilled water temperature in its processes and to operate freezers and food storage areas. The refrigeration system uses anhydrous ammonia as the refrigerant. On the evening of July 31st, 2024, an emergency pressure relief valve opened, as shown on the right there, and released anhydrous ammonia to the atmosphere. Those on site at the time evacuated the facility, but in the process, several personnel were exposed to the ammonia cloud that developed. In total, 40 people working at the site were evaluated at various medical facilities, of which 4 were admitted to the hospital and 1 of which required treatment in the intensive care unit. When released, anhydrous ammonia will absorb atmospheric moisture. This is what forms the visible cloud. The release point in the red circle there on the right was through a horizontal T, so you can see it coming out of both sides of the T here. Personnel located inside the building in the blue box there on the left and adjacent to the release point, which is shown by the star, identified and reported an ammonia odor. Since the emergency exit door for this area led directly into the white cloud on the west side of the building, the site manager directed personnel to evacuate the building via the opposite or east side of the building. However, some personnel unwittingly exited the building near or into the ammonia cloud and were exposed to ammonia vapor. Although part of the ammonia vapor cloud was not visible, the ammonia concentration was still high enough to harm some evacuees, including outside the visible cloud. On the east side of the building, or along the evacuation route directed by the site manager, shown by the green arrows on the right, some evacuees reported smelling a strong ammonia odor, although there was no visible cloud along this evacuation route. Personnel were directed to the initial muster point, as shown on the right, near the main entrance of the building. The initial muster point was abandoned due to ammonia odor. Evacuees then walked to the location marked final evacuation point, approximately 1/3 of a mile away from the initial muster point, to escape the ammonia odor. Emergency medical teams then evaluated and treated personnel as needed. This concludes the investigation update for Cuisine Solutions. More details are available at csb.gov. Thank you.
Melinda, thank you for the update on the Cuisine Solutions investigation. The next investigation update will cover the incident that took place at the Biolab Conyers facility in Georgia. The investigator in charge was Vanzella Vincent. She and her fellow investigator, Marianne Bogutsky, are actually at the facility this week conducting their critical on-scene work. Chemical incident investigator Drew Solly will be making the presentation on this incident investigation update. So Drew, please proceed.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. As Steve said, I'm Drew Solly. I am not the investigator in charge of the Biolab investigation, and I am instead pinch hitting for my colleagues who are out in the field doing the good work. Next slide, Brian. The Biolab Conyers facility has been in operation since 1973 in Conyers, Georgia, in Rockdale County. It employs approximately 241 full-time employees. The Conyers site converts raw materials and packages finished recreational water care consumer products for retail sale. The Biolab Conyers site operates several production and manufacturing facilities and storage warehouses, including one designated as Plant 12. Plant 12 was a bulk chemical storage warehouse that was larger than 5 football fields combined. It was involved in the September 29th, 2024 incident and contained raw and packaging materials. According to Biolab, the Plant 12 warehouse stored super sacks containing multiple solid oxidizers, more than 5.6 million kilograms in granular form that have a chlorine odor, including 99% trichloroisocyanuric acid, or TCCA, sodium dichloroisocyanurate, or DCCA, and bromochloro-5,5-dimethylimidazolidine 2,4-dione, or BCDMH. And I'm going to have a conversation with Bonzella about ever making me try to say that word again. These bulk solid oxidizers can release toxic and corrosive products upon decomposition. Biolab Conyers had established a permanent fire watch a few months prior to the incident after detecting strong odors in 2 storage buildings, including Plant 12, to mitigate any potential product decomposition events. The fire watch responsibilities included identifying and managing hazards, detecting early signs of product decomposition or fire hazards, notifying site leadership of any observed leaks or water intrusions, and contacting the third-party sprinkler company if necessary. On September 29th, 2024, at approximately 5 o'clock in the morning, a chemical reaction occurred inside Plant 12 involving the bulk solid materials stored inside. This reaction resulted in product decomposition, the generation of excessive heat, multiple fires, extensive off-gassing, and a massive plume of potentially toxic smoke. The local community was put at risk of being exposed to toxic chlorine gas. Shelter-in-place orders were issued. The final shelter-in-place warning within a 2-mile radius of the facility expired several weeks after the incident on October 17th. There were mandatory evacuations. Interstate 20 was closed for approximately 19 hours, and other smaller arterial roads were closed longer. Smog or haze with a smell of chlorine drifted in parts of the metropolitan Atlanta area. The EPA and commissioned subcontractors conducted air monitoring at Biolab and the surrounding areas. The Plant 12 warehouse was completely destroyed, and no injuries were reported at the site during the incident or in the subsequent emergency response that followed. Post-incident site remediation and cleanup activities remain ongoing. The investigation team is continuing to gather facts, including similarities to previous Biolab incidents, and analyzing several key areas of the incident, including the cause or the probable cause of the material decomposition, off-gassing, and possible ignition source of the fire, storage and handling of oxidizers and their compatibility, regulatory and industry guidance on fire protection systems for bulk solid oxidizers with reactive chemical characteristics. Our complete findings, analysis, recommendations if appropriate, and key lessons will be detailed in the final investigation report. Thank you. That includes my portion of the presentation.
Thank you, Drew, for the presentation. And as Drew mentioned, this is the second incident that has taken place at the Conyers facility. We are very much interested in the outcome of this investigation for sure. Our next presentation will be an investigation update on the Pemex refinery accidental release event. The investigator in charge, Tyler Nelson, will be making the presentation. So Tyler, please proceed.
Tyler, I'm hearing some audio issue. Would you mind unmuting and muting and unmuting again, please?
How's this microphone?
There we go. I think we're in good shape.
Thank you. And I don't see the slides on my screen.
I'll reshare.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
You got it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Nelson. I'm the investigator in charge of the CSB's investigation into the fatal hydrogen sulfide release at the Pemex Deer Park refinery in Deer Park, Texas. On October 10th, 2024, at 4:23 p.m., approximately 27,000 pounds of hydrogen sulfide gas were released during a maintenance activity at the Pemex Deer Park refinery in Deer Park, Texas. The release fatally injured 2 contract workers. The CSB released an investigation update in November 2024. You can find the published update and related news releases on our website, csb.gov. On the day of the incident, Pemex Deer Park personnel assigned contract workers from RepCon, an industrial services contractor, with a maintenance job that required opening piping flanges on isolated non-operational segments within a part of the plant called the Immune Regeneration Unit Number 6, or ARU6. Hydrogen sulfide was not present in the ARU6 piping segments. 5 feet away from this piping, a nearly identical piping segment from another unit, ARU7, contains 90% hydrogen sulfide, which was actively flowing. At 4:23 p.m., RepCon workers opened a flange connection on the ARU piping containing hydrogen sulfide, resulting in the release and fatally injuring one of the RepCon workers. 2 contract workers from another company were working on equipment 250 feet away and downwind from the release. One of these workers was also fatally injured. The release continued for 1 hour until Pemex Deer Park operators and emergency responders isolated the leak by closing upstream valves and retightening bolts on the open flange. Approximately 27,000 pounds of hydrogen sulfide were released to the atmosphere. 13 other contract workers were taken to nearby hospitals for medical treatment. The neighboring cities of Deer Park and Pasadena, Texas, issued shelter-in-place orders that lasted several hours. The CSB is continuing to gather facts and analyze several key areas, including permit to work practices, energy isolation, contractor management, emergency preparedness, response, and communication practices, hazard analyses, maintenance procedures, training programs, respiratory protection, and remote isolation capability. Complete findings, analysis, and recommendations will be detailed in the CSB's final investigation report. This concludes the update on the CSB's Pemex Deer Park investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Since our last public business meeting, the CSB deployed a team to investigate the accidental release event at the Givaudan Sense Color facility in Louisville, Kentucky. The supervisory chemical incident investigator, Lauren Grimm, is serving as the investigator in charge, and she will be making the next presentation to provide a summary of the deployment activities to date. Lauren, please proceed.
Thank you, Steve. I'm Lauren Grimm, and I'm the investigator in charge of the CSB's investigation of the Givaudan incident. On November 12th, 2024, a caramel color cooking vessel exploded at the Givaudan Sense Color facility in Louisville, Kentucky. 2 employees were fatally injured by the explosion. The incident also resulted in substantial property damage, which can be seen in the photo here. Portions of the facility collapsed, piping and vessel fragments ejected outside of the company property into the adjacent residential neighborhood, and there was also structural damage and shattered windows in the neighborhood after the incident. In addition, a shelter-in-place order was issued after the incident for the 1-mile radius around the facility. Next slide, please. Our 6-person investigation team deployed to the site on November 19th, 2024. Since then, we've conducted over 30 interviews and we've been collecting evidence. The investigation is ongoing as we review the evidence, review the process data, and conduct additional analyses and interviews as part of our investigation. That concludes my presentation, and back to you, Executive Director Kleist.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you to the team that deployed to investigate this incident. Our final presentation this afternoon will be made by the Office of Recommendations. Our Director of Recommendations, Chuck Barbie, will make the presentation. So, Chuck, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Steve. So as Steve said, I'm the Director of Recommendations for the Office of Recommendations, and what I'm about to present is the hard work from my staff, Amanda Johnson and Adam Henson, who are recommendation specialists. So today we're going to highlight 4 recommendations. First is Chevron R31 to API, then Capico R7 to API, and then Williams R4 and R5, both of which are to API. And you may see a common theme here. So we'll start with Chevron Richmond refinery fire. On August 6th of 2012, there was a catastrophic pipe failure that resulted in a large flammable hydrocarbon release which eventually found heat source, ignited, and caused a large fire. At the time, there were 19 Chevron employees that were engulfed by that vapor cloud, and they narrowly avoided serious injury. The large plume that resulted had unknown particulars and vapors, and as a result of that, 1,500 people from the surrounding communities sought medical attention. Additionally, there were 6 injured workers. As a result of our investigation, the CSB issued 37 recommendations. 6 of those were to API, and we're going to talk about R31. R31, we asked API to revise their recommended practice 2001, which is fire protection in refineries. We asked for a fluid leak response protocol when there was a leak discovered. We asked for ICS structure, pre-response meetings, and establishment of a hot zone, and some other things. And API's work to implement R31. And this first bullet is key. We met with API, we met with them multiple times. We met with the committee that oversaw this recommended practice to discuss how best to make changes in API RP 2001. As a result of all that work and communication, on October 24th of 2024, API published Addendum 1 to API RP 2001, and that did include the leak response protocol, pre-planning response scenarios, management of unignited material leaks, reinforcement of the ICS structure, and various other things. The majority of this came from our discussion, and that's one of, like I say, I wanted to talk about that a little bit and highlight that in each of these recommendations. That discussion with those experts, we had some very specific things we wanted in the recommendation, and what they did is they proposed different things, and a lot of those were better than what we had envisioned, but they were different from what we specifically asked for, and as a result of that, we closed that recommendation, acceptable alternative action. Thank you. The next recommendation comes from the Caribbean Petroleum Corporation Refinery Tank Explosion and Fire. Caribbean Petroleum Corporation, we've shortened that to CAPECO, however you want to pronounce it. This happened on October 23rd of 2009. So a tank ship, the Cape Bruni, was offloading their contents into the CAPECO onshore tank farm. And during that operation, they overfilled the above ground storage tanks and released approximately 200,000 gallons of gasoline. That formed a vapor cloud, which had an estimated size of approximately 107 acres. So this was a huge vapor cloud. So it found an ignition source, and there were multiple explosions and fire. As a result, 17 of the 48 petroleum storage tanks were damaged, and the blast created a pressure wave that registered 2.9 on the Richter scale. That pressure wave damaged approximately 300 homes and businesses up to almost 1.25 miles away. So this was huge explosion, and lots of environmental damage also as a result. Now, as a result of our investigation, the CSB issued 9 recommendations. 3 of those went to API, and this one is CAPECO R7. We asked API to revise Standard 2350, which is the overfill protection for storage tanks and petroleum facilities. We wanted them to require the installation of an automatic overfill prevention system for both existing and new facilities at bulk above ground storage tanks storing highly flammable liquids. And like I said, we've worked on this back and forth with API for quite a while. And again, we met with them and their committees, and we had lots of discussions on this. As a result, in 2020, the API published the 5th edition of API Standard 2350. That standard addresses comprehensive overfill protection system. So what we wanted was a mandated automatic overspill protection system. And what we got was something a little bit more comprehensive that did not mandate certain things, but did require other things. So this included some of those automatic pieces that we wanted, and it met the requirements listed in the subparagraphs of the recommendation. So as a result of all the work of API, we closed this recommendation acceptable alternative action. The next investigation we're going to talk about is the Williams Olefins plant explosion and fire. This occurred June 13th of 2013. During non-routine operations, reboiler ruptured due to overpressurization, and at the time it was isolated from its pressure relief device. Now, this incident, it resulted in 2 worker fatalities as well as 167 injured employees, 3 of which were Williams employees and 164 of which were contractors. As a result of the investigation, the CSB issued 5 recommendations, 2 of which were to API, and we're going to talk about both of them. So the first was Williams R4. We asked them to revise API standard 521, which is the pressure relieving and depressuring systems. We wanted to define various different types of equipment operation statuses, including standby and out of service, and we wanted to specify relief requirements for each type of operating status. So again, we met with API and their committees, and we discussed this. And in 2020, June of 2020, they released the 5th edition of API Standard 521. I'm sorry, the 7th edition. Typo, sorry about that. It provides guidance, recommendations, and alternatives to assist owners and operators and users in defining pressure relieving requirements for all modes of operation, which include standby and out of service, as well as design of pressure relieving and vapor depressurizing systems at various facility types. Based upon these revisions, we recommended that R4 be closed acceptable alternative action, and the board agreed. We also issued R5, Williams R5 to API, and we wanted to require a pressure relief device for overpressure scenarios where internal vessel pressure can exceed what is allowed by the design code. And in our discussions with API, again, the 7th edition cautions against relying solely on administrative controls to address overpressure hazards. It also brings to attention the fact that block valves have the potential to leak and cautions that this may lead to hydraulic expansion and overpressurization of isolated heat exchangers. And based upon the revision in the 7th edition, we propose the board close this recommendation acceptable alternative action. And again, they agreed. Now I had this, I wanted to talk about these particular recommendations because they were all issued to API. If you go back in our history and our first investigation where we issued recommendations, some of those recommendations went to API. They are our longest stakeholder, and they have received more recommendations from the CSB than any other. Now, as a result of the work, and a lot of that was done by API, both the Capico refinery tank explosion and fire investigation and the Williams Olefins plant explosion and fire investigation, all of those recommendations have been closed out. Those 2 investigations represent 2 fatalities, 107 injuries, 300 homes damaged, significant property and environmental damage. And as a result of those 2 investigations, again, we issued 14 recommendations intended to protect communities, workers, and the environment. And now, and largely on the part of API's work, all of those recommendations are now closed. And with that concludes my presentation, and I will pass it back to Executive Director Steve Kleist. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. And I'd like to thank the presenters this afternoon, as well as the members of the investigation team that helped support the investigations that we discussed this afternoon. Before I turn the meeting back over to Chairperson Owens, I would like to recognize two individuals that are those that successfully completed our Pathways Professional Development Program. Eduardo Alvarez and Dr. Lisaura Maldonado Pereira successfully completed their Pathways program and are now functioning as chemical incident investigators. So congratulations on your accomplishment, and we look forward to incorporating you into our current investigations further, as well as your support for future investigations. So again, congratulations. I'll now turn the presentation back over to Chairperson Owens. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Steve. And I just want to follow up on what you said, and also the presentations that were made earlier with regard to Eddie and Lisaura. We're extremely happy that not only they joined us initially in the Pathways program, but they've now moved up in the world and become full-time investigators in our investigations program. The same is also true for Owen Tripany, who presented earlier as well. He just happened to join a little bit sooner than Eddie and Lisaura did as well. But just a comment on that, that's a very important aspect of the work that we do here at the CSB, not only in terms of bringing new people into the agency, but developing them so that they learn the skills they need to become effective investigators at the agency. I will say, as I mentioned before, and we've talked about often on these calls, the commitment we have to rebuilding and revitalizing the CSB. When all three of us were going through our respective confirmation hearings, one of the things that was repeatedly brought to our attention by members of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, both Democrats and Republicans, was the need to get more people on board, and especially with a focus on the investigative staff, so that we have the capacity to investigate the incidents that, as we've discussed today, are occurring across this country every week. But more significantly, when I became the interim executive rather of the CSB at the end of July 2022, we began the heavy lifting of trying to put the agency back on the right course. And at that time, the staff level of the CSB was at its lowest level than it had been since 2001, well over 20 years. Which is a significant reason why there was such an enormous backlog of reports. There were other contributing reasons as well, but that was one of the primary ones, was the number of investigators who had left the agency and not been replaced over the years for various reasons. So we rolled up our sleeves and went to work on that, and we're absolutely delighted that people like the folks you heard from today through all the presentations have joined the agency. Over the years, most of them fairly recently, but some of them, like Lauren Grimm and Dan Talim, have been around for a while. I will say also Lauren Grimm, who started at the CSB years ago as a Pathways person, and as a wonderful example of how well that program works for this agency. To just follow up on a couple of things that also were mentioned with regard to the presentations that were just given, I think for virtually all of them, or for all of them, except for the Givaudan incident, there are written updates available on our CSB website. So some of the information you heard today is contained in those reports. If you wanted to go back and take a look at what was presented today, as well as at least some of the information today, as well as what's in those reports, you can do that on the website. And then just to follow up on what Chuck was saying at the very end there about the work that his office does in producing recommendations, but also significantly the continuing work that they and other people in the agency do with our stakeholders, including particularly API. As you can see from when those incidents initially occurred, we're in this for the long haul in terms of making sure that our recommendations are enacted and are adopted by the people we make recommendations to, whether it's a trade association or whether it's a professional group or whether it's a company itself. or whether it's another governmental entity. And it takes a little perseverance and persistence on the part of our team, but it also takes perseverance on the part of the people who get the recipients, like API. They've been a terrific partner for this agency. They have worked very diligently to do what they believe needs to be done based on the recommendations that we have made. And as we have gone through that process with them over the years on the recommendations that Chuck talked about, you can see that at times they are not exactly what we recommended. Sometimes it's better than what we recommended. And that's just part of the way that this agency works. And we cannot, again, express our appreciation to the various stakeholders out there who are not only, for better or worse, are getting recommendations for us and have some extra work to do, but who help us do the jobs that we need to be doing every single day to make sure we get it right when we do a report on an incident investigation and when we come up with recommendations for them. So hats off to all of them. So with all of that, I am now going to turn us over to Brian so we can see the BioLab video on the incident in Westlake, Louisiana, or in the BioLab Lake Charles facility in Westlake, Louisiana. Thank you. I got a little bit tongue-tied there, which is a different incident from the one that you just heard a presentation on in the Conyers event, which just occurred this past year. This was one that occurred, as I mentioned earlier, in August of 2020. This was an event where Hurricane Laura had damaged the roof of the facility at the Westlake facility in Louisiana. Rainwater got in, came into contact with some of the chemical products there, including TCCA, which Drew Solly talked about as being present at the BioLab Conyers facility as well. Caused it's a reactive substance. It caused a very large fire, created significant damage to the facility, which eventually had to be rebuilt at a cost of over $250 million. And it also put the surrounding community at risk. So with that, Brian, I'll turn it over to you. And then after that, we'll go to questions. I know a couple of people had their hands up during the presentations. I've made a note of that. We'll circle back with you if you're still around to take the questions, and then whoever else has any comments or questions. So Brian, turn it to you. So.
August 27th, 2020, the BioLab Lake Charles Chemical Facility in Westlake, Louisiana. Extreme wind from Hurricane Laura ripped through the facility, severely damaging buildings. Rainwater seeped into the compromised buildings and contacted products stored inside, causing chemicals to react, decompose, and a fire to ignite. A large plume of hazardous gases, including toxic chlorine, traveled from the facility over the neighboring community, requiring many people living nearby to shelter in place and a major highway to be closed.
The fire and release at BioLab is not the only significant chemical incident in recent years to be caused by extreme weather. Companies and regulators must take steps to ensure that chemical facilities are protected against damage from natural hazards, as extreme weather is becoming more common.
The BioLab Lake Charles facility manufactures and supplies water care products for pools and spas. One of the materials produced at the facility is a formulation comprised primarily of the chemical TCCA. In large bodies of water, like swimming pools, TCCA-based formulations dissolve and break down slowly, releasing available chlorine into the water to sanitize contaminants, such as algae and bacteria. But when a TCCA-based formulation instead contacts a small amount of water and does not dissolve, it can undergo a chemical reaction that generates heat and causes the material to decompose and produce toxic chlorine gas. On August 24, 2020, the National Hurricane Center forecasted that Tropical Storm Laura would become a hurricane the next day. Laura was expected to approach the U.S. coast near major hurricane strength, with strong winds and heavy rainfall. That day, BioLab began shutting down its Lake Charles operations in preparation for the hurricane. The company successfully transported about 825,000 pounds of product from the site. But some trucks scheduled to remove additional material never arrived at the facility, meaning over 1 million pounds of the TCCA-based formulation was left on site. The remaining product was placed on triple-stacked pallets to protect it from potential floodwater. On the morning of August 26th, BioLab's management announced its decision to evacuate the facility. All employees left the site. At 1 a.m. on August 27th, Hurricane Laura made landfall in southwest Louisiana as a Category 4 hurricane, with maximum sustained winds reaching 150 miles per hour. The storm dumped huge amounts of rain, with some areas of southwestern Louisiana getting as much as 12 inches. Strong hurricane winds ripped off portions of the roof that covered BioLab's Plant 4 production building, which housed an estimated 70,000 to 100,000 pounds of TCCA-based formulation. Because of damage to Plant 4's roof, rainwater contacted the product stored inside. By 8:30 a.m., the material began to react. It generated heat and decomposed, releasing toxic chlorine gas. Heat from the reaction and decomposition caused a fire to erupt in the building. A massive toxic gas and smoke plume traveled over the local community toward Interstate 10. Emergency responders closed Interstate 10 near the facility and requested a shelter-in-place order be issued for nearby residents. The fire grew quickly, ultimately destroying the Plant 4 process building and its equipment. Later in the afternoon, around 5:30 p.m., white chemical clouds were seen emerging from another building at the facility. The building, a warehouse that contained over 1 million pounds of the TCCA-based formulation, had also sustained severe damage to portions of its roof. Emergency responders worked to reduce and control the chemical release. By 2:30 p.m. the following day, events at the BioLab facility were deemed sufficiently controlled. After being closed for 28 hours, Interstate 10 was reopened and the shelter-in-place order was lifted. Thankfully, no injuries were reported as a result of the incidents. The Chemical Safety Board launched an investigation into the fire and release at BioLab and found that 5 safety issues contributed to the incident. They are extreme weather preparation, process hazard analyses implementation, emergency preparedness and response, adherence to applicable hazardous materials code, and regulatory coverage of reactive chemical hazards. The first safety issue is extreme weather preparation. In May 2018, the CSB released its final report on the 2017 incident at the Arkema chemical plant in Crosby, Texas. At Arkema, flooding from Category 4 Hurricane Harvey disabled the facility's refrigeration system. As a result, chemicals that required refrigeration decomposed and burned, releasing fumes and smoke into the air. The CSB's Arkema report recommended that the Center for Chemical Process Safety, or CCPS, develop broad and comprehensive guidance to help companies assess their U.S. facility risk from all types of potential extreme weather events. In response to this recommendation, in 2019, CCPS updated its publication, CCPS Monograph, Assessment of and Planning for Natural Hazards. The monograph presents steps for preparing for a natural disaster, including how to evaluate wind hazards and how to identify potentially vulnerable equipment. But the CSB found that BioLab did not adequately implement the updated CCPS guidance at its Lake Charles facility.
Had BioLab effectively followed that guidance, it would have identified that the buildings used to house the TCCA base formulation were not built to current wind design code requirements. This knowledge could have led BioLab to take more proactive actions to protect its chemicals during a hurricane, thereby preventing the incident.
And the CSB found that additional measures are needed to ensure that aging Louisiana chemical facilities are protected from extreme weather. That is because there are potentially many more facilities in the state that store hazardous materials in buildings that were designed before current wind design code requirements were in effect. Therefore, the CSB made a recommendation to the state of Louisiana to require the operators of certain chemical facilities at risk from extreme weather to evaluate the hazards to their facilities presented by hurricanes and accompanying wind, rainwater, floodwater, or storm surge forces, and implement processes and safeguards for protection against those hazards. Finally, the CSB believes the EPA should take further actions to help ensure that chemical facilities around the country consider risks presented by climate change and increased extreme weather events. These actions were outlined as recommendations made to the EPA by the Government Accountability Office, or GAO. In its report, Chemical Accident Prevention, EPA should ensure regulated facilities consider risk from climate change. For example, the GAO calls on the EPA to produce guidance that requires covered facilities to incorporate hazards from climate change into their risk management plans, assess the risk of climate change during inspections, and increase inspection of facilities located within vulnerable communities. The EPA has yet to act on the majority of the GAO's report. Therefore, the CSB made a recommendation to the EPA to implement the remaining recommendations made to the EPA in the Government Accountability Office's report. The second safety issue identified at BioLab is process hazard analyses implementation. The CSB learned that TCCA is not covered by the OSHA Process Safety Management, or PSM, regulation. However, the BioLab Lake Charles facility voluntarily adopted some aspects of PSM. For instance, the company performed limited process hazard analyses, or PHAs, in 2010 and in 2016, before the incident. During the 2010 PHA, the potential hazard of warehouse product decomposition was identified, with a potential cause of warehouse roof failure due to natural disasters such as hurricanes or tornadoes. The PHA team recommended that the site consider evaluating warehouse roof structure for hurricane conditions and verify warehouse is built to withstand high winds. But the CSB found there was no documentation that such an evaluation ever took place.
Had BioLab implemented its 2010 PHA recommendation, it could have identified that the facility buildings were susceptible to damage from hurricane-strength winds. This may have led to BioLab implementing controls to prevent the TCCA base formulation from being exposed to hurricane rainwater.
And the CSB determined that the lack of documentation regarding the 2010 PHA recommendation points to deficiencies in BioLab's PHA Action Item Management System.
Companies should ensure that PHA recommendations are assigned to appropriate personnel with a deadline for initial evaluation. The rationale for recommendation modification or rejection must be documented, and the status of all action items or recommendations should be tracked until completion. Such a process ensures that findings and recommendations from PHAs are effectively acted upon and appropriately managed.
The third safety issue found at BioLab Lake Charles is emergency preparedness and response. The CSB found that BioLab relied on hose stations, fire hydrants, and monitors in the event of an emergency. and its fire protection system used 4 sequentially operated pumps to supply water from a reservoir to fire suppression equipment. At the time of the incident, one of those pumps was not functional. One was powered by diesel and 2 ran on electricity. BioLab relied on a backup generator to power those 2 electric pumps in the event of a power outage. But the CSB learned that BioLab's backup generator was not working before the hurricane. Therefore, the company rented a generator in preparation for Hurricane Laura. With electricity knocked out at BioLab and the surrounding area, the company needed to use this rental backup generator to operate the electric fire water pumps on the day of the incident. But the CSB found that BioLab personnel struggled to activate the rental generator or transfer power from it, and did not have a manual or operating procedure to help them troubleshoot the issues, so the company could not run the electric pumps. As a result, only 1 fire pump, a diesel pump, was available for BioLab's response. Therefore, the water pressure to the fire protection system was too low to suppress the decomposing material. The decomposition and fire could not be controlled until a third-party emergency response contractor arrived with equipment capable of effectively responding to the incident. This was over 5 hours from when BioLab first contacted 911.
Companies must ensure that emergency response equipment is fully operational and can function when needed during emergencies. Companies should adequately maintain the equipment and repair or replace equipment in a timely manner. Companies must also ensure employees are trained on how to use the emergency equipment.
The 4th safety issue that CSB highlights in its report is adherence to applicable hazardous materials codes. The CSB found that because BioLab Lake Charles was storing and handling large quantities of a TCCA-based formulation, it should have implemented extra precautions as required by applicable hazardous materials codes. In this case, the applicable codes are set by the National Fire Protection Association and are known as NFPA 101 and NFPA 400. NFPA 101 requires an automatic sprinkler or other protection designed to minimize danger to occupants before they have time to evacuate from high-hazard occupancies. NFPA 400 specifies sprinkler systems, among other requirements, for buildings storing hazardous materials. But the CSB found that BioLab lacked those extra precautions.
Had the BioLab facility met the 2 NFPA code requirements, it likely would have begun applying large amounts of water to the decomposing chemical much earlier. This earlier response could have reduced the amount of material that decomposed, reduced the amount of chlorine released, and reduced the extent of the facility damage.
And finally, the 5th safety issue identified by the CSB is regulatory coverage of reactive chemical hazards. TCCA-based formulations are reactive chemicals that have the potential to decompose and release toxic chlorine gas. But TCCA is not listed for coverage under OSHA's PSM standard or the EPA's Risk Management Program rule. Therefore, BioLab was not required to implement baseline process safety management system elements under these specific regulations. The CSB has long been concerned about the regulatory gap in coverage of reactive chemicals, which has led to many serious incidents over the past 3 decades. Those incidents caused deaths, injuries, and significant property damage.
The CSB continues to investigate incidents that could have been prevented with more robust regulatory coverage of reactive chemicals. Both the OSHA PSM and EPA RMP regulations should be amended to close the regulatory gap identified by the CSB.
In its report, the CSB reiterated a recommendation previously made to OSHA to amend the Process Safety Management Standard to achieve more comprehensive control of reactive hazards that could have catastrophic consequences. And the CSB also reiterated a recommendation to the EPA to revise the accidental release prevention requirements to explicitly cover catastrophic reactive hazards that have the potential to seriously impact the public.
The incident at BioLab could have been prevented. Companies must be prepared for the hazards extreme weather can present at their facilities, and regulatory bodies should do more to address reactive chemical risks. These steps will help ensure that similar incidents never occur. Thank you for watching this CSB safety video.
For more information, please visit csb.gov.
All right, well, thank you, Brian, for handling that, and thank you all of you for your patience in watching the video. It's a very compelling and important video, and thanks for sticking with us during the meeting. As I said, it's up on our YouTube page. Just Google CSB YouTube, and it'll pop up. And if you're not already a subscriber to the page, we very much encourage you to do so you'll get notifications whenever we do post new videos, which we have several in the works already, that'll be posted throughout coming months. So stay tuned for those. Now we'll go to the public comment portion of our meeting. I will just remind everybody to please raise your hand, use the icon on your screen there and raise your hand and be recognized. Several of you have already done that. When you are recognized, please state your name and any organization that you're affiliated with. And also we'll ask that you please keep your comments to 3 minutes in the interest of time. Then last but not least, as a general proposition, we'll really won't be able to answer any detailed questions or give any detailed answers, but I'll give it my best shot in terms of responding to comments or other things that are raised during this. So at least we can give you a little bit more information if you're wondering about something that was presented today or about where you can get information on some of the activities of the CSB. I have a list here, Greg. I don't know if they're still interested in speaking, but the first person that had their name on the screen, at least their hand raised, was Greg. It didn't have a last name with it. I don't know if Greg is still there. Then I had a Mark Sorrells, Sorrells. And now I know Kevin's, I don't know if it's Stevic or Stevic, has his hand now. And so I will leave it to you, Brian, to recognize folks in whatever order you want to recognize them as, and we'll take it from there. So,
considering we have one hand up at the moment, Kenan, I've asked you to unmute, so feel free to unmute. And
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yep. Okay, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ken Stevic, a retiree from the chemical industry. Just one quick comment and then a question. We won't need a detailed answer, though. Great job in getting all these investigations, finished up. So kudos to you guys for that. The question is, in the spirit of continuous improvement, the addendum 1 for the RP 2001 is something that would serve all of industry, not just the refineries. Have you guys considered doing like you did with OSHA and the CCPS and publishing the reactive chemical guidance book for everybody for free? Getting that addendum out there for everybody for free, because it's probably, from what I've seen, the type of things that have been developed through API, is probably something that would help everybody.
well, Ken, thank you for that. I don't believe we have any current plan to do that. I may look to Executive Director Kleist from our Investigations and Recommendations Office if he has any information on that. But if not, I think that's we can have some conversations about that. We have our limited resources at the CSB, but but we're always trying to put information out there, and a lot of our resources that we can provide to people. And that sounds like something that would be pretty important. So
I'll chip in if you guys can't afford it totally. So
we'll take up we'll pass the hat here. So, but
thanks.
Thank you, Ken. So I don't know if Mark was still with us, if he, his hand popped up, I think, in the middle of one of the presentations. And so.
Not Mark, but Althea Christensen.
Yep.
Should
Hi,
have.
Althea.
Okay.
Welcome back. I think you were with us the last call. So
Yes, thank you. You remembered.
do.
I see down there that Hillary Cohen and Shauna Lawhorn are there, and I just wanted to congratulate you both on your excellent work. Many of us who watch the videos watch all the way through the credits, and your names are always there. So I wanted to congratulate you on that. I know last time we talked a little bit about trying to get more people into the field as a career, and in the YouTube comments and stuff, sometimes people are like, oh man, I'd love to do this. Oh, I wonder what I need to study. So might be a good idea to do a video just kind of talking to some of your investigators about their career paths, their education paths, what kind of things they studied, or their backgrounds with that. Just to give people an idea of what they need to do to get there. And yeah, that's all. Keep up the good work.
Well, Althea, thank you again for being with us today, and thank you for that suggestion. I will say, I don't know that we ever thought about that. I will say that some of our investigators are a little more camera shy than others, but I think that the general suggestion is a very good one, because we get asked questions a lot about how do you become an investigator? What's the process? Also, what kind of qualifications do you need to have? I will say one of the things I learned when Sylvia and I first joined the board, as I mentioned 3 years ago, we started getting to know the employees, and one of the questions we would ask is, why did you want to work at the CSB? And I will tell you, there were quite a few investigators who said that working at the CSB was their dream job, that they had either worked in industry or at facilities that may have either had incidents or could potentially have had incidents, and they felt that they had knowledge and skills they can bring to this agency when investigating accidental releases of chemicals, but also that they had a lot to contribute. And so we're trying to get the word out there and put out as much information as we can on that. So we'll put our thinking caps on. And I know that Steve Kleist raises his hand. He wants to chime in on this. So go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Althea, if you could send your contact information to public@csb.gov, I can send you a link to a podcast that was produced by a third party that deals essentially with some of the issues you raised in your comment. A little bit about what we are, who we do, but also featured a few of our investigators and how they wound up where they are today. So you may find that to be very useful. But again, if you could send your contact information to public@csb.gov, I can make sure that you get that link, and hopefully that will address the bulk of your question today. So thank you. I appreciate your comments on our work.
Well, thanks, Steve, for bringing that up. That's a good place to send the comments. I will say, just to follow up a little bit more on Althea's comment, that at the moment, not all, but many of the investigators are chemical engineers. Some of them have more than one degree in various topics, but we've had others who are, one at least who's a mechanical engineer. We have other people with other technical backgrounds who are involved both in the investigation and recommendations offices. And so, we have lots of opportunities here. Our issue is always going to be resources. As I mentioned, we've been working very hard to rebuild this agency within the resource constraints that we have. And we focus predominantly on people with the technical abilities, but historically, the agency has had folks other than engineers of whatever kind involved in the investigation process. And so So we are always looking for new ideas and new ways to move forward. So as Steve said, yeah, send us your contact information. He'll send you that, and we'll put our thinking caps on. So Brian, anybody else out there?
I haven't seen Greg or Mark, nor any other hands at the moment.
Okay. Well, hearing none, I'll just want to thank everybody once again for showing up. I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia and Kathy in a minute for their closing remarks, but I appreciate, oops, we have one more hand. I'll finish what I was going to say, then we'll go to him. But, we went a little bit longer than we've done in some of our recent calls, but we really wanted to show the video and give all of you an opportunity to see the great work that our team has been doing. So Brian, I'll turn it back to you for recognizing another commenter.
Kevin, you should be able to unmute, and the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. No, thank you for the time. Just first off, congratulations to you and members Johnson and Sandoval for your service anniversaries. As you mentioned with the constraints, and just dealing with that, the board certainly has 2 other seats, but are there any plans, or is that kind of part of what you mentioned, that there are 2 unfilled seats, but you're just working with the constraints that you have?
Well, let's talk more about money than that
Right.
on the year, but there are seats. We don't really have any involvement in that. That's always a decision made by the White House. The 3 of us were appointed during the previous administration. We'll obviously wait and see if the current administration has any plans to appoint anybody to the board. And obviously it's a process that you go through when you're nominated for a position like this. FBI background checks, lots of meetings with congressional staff and members of the Senate, and then ultimately a confirmation hearing. And so it's a process, but we'll wait and see what happens. So.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
See, we have another one. I apologize. I don't know if this name's entered incorrectly, but Tanahiri, you should have the floor.
Hello. I thank you so much for your videos. I have learned a lot throughout the years. I've been following you guys for about 10 years now. And I am subscribed, so I do get the notifications when you do get the new videos done. I'm really a fan of your work. And I would like to know if the STAR Pathway program that you guys have, is that something that anybody can do, or does he have to be like a federal employee, or how does that work?
Well, thank you for your question. That's a great question. I know we talked a little bit about the pathways earlier. Anyone can apply, but they're within the requirements of the program. It's at least the way the piece of the pathways program that we've relied upon and is for college or graduate school graduates who are less or 2 years or less out of graduate or undergraduate institutions. Beyond that, we have in the job announcements that were posted for those, have put the technical qualifications that we have and all locations of the individuals that we've had so far have been chemical engineers, but it's a program that you can have all types of people applying to depending on the needs of an agency. I will say, I mentioned, that Lauren Grimm was a pathways person who started her career at the agency and is still with us, thankfully. We have another investigator, another one of our supervisory investigators who also started at the program. I think Althea mentioned Hillary Cohen. With regard to the videos, Hillary started with us as a pathways person. I won't say how many years ago, Hillary, but she started with us at the beginning of her career, so it's really paid dividends with us. But I will also say, when we came in, when Sylvia and I joined the agency. Initially, the agency really hadn't taken advantage of that program in a long time. And when we were looking at the resource constraints of the agency compared to the personnel needs and the work that was fairly daunting that faced us at the time with the huge backlog and reports and the real lack of current investigations and the low staff levels that the agency had fallen to. We not only set about to recruit full investigators, to use that term, but made a decision to really get back in the game with the Pathways program. And we've been very, very, very fortunate over the last couple of years, as you can see from the 3 individuals who presented today and some of the other folks that we've had join us recently. That has just been a wonderful, wonderful program for us, and we're just delighted it's worked out so well. But yeah, so it's, it depends on what our need is at the time, but at the moment, we really focus very intently on the investigations needs, and as I mentioned, particularly with regard to chemical engineers, but that might change at some point depending on how things go. So thank you for the question. So
Thank you.
okay, great stuff.
That,
All right, everyone.
last
Well,
thing.
Oops.
I think that's it for, I don't see any more hands queued.
Okay, well, with that, I will turn it over to Sylvia and Kathy, and then I'll, whoops, one more. There we go. We provoked somebody else into to talk, to making a comment. So.
There and gone.
Oh, it was a Tom Duffy, I think, but anyway. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sylvia and then Kathy, and then I'll take us home. So.
Thank you all.
Well, thank you everyone for attending today's meeting. As always, your presence here and your questions and comments reinforce the importance of our shared mission here at the CSB. And the questions and insight that you bring to this help us stay focused on what matters, which is protecting workers, safeguarding communities, and preserving the environment. I want to again thank the entire CSB team and express my deep gratitude for your dedication and hard work, because the work of this team highlights not just the cost of accidents, but the value of prevention. And I do believe that together we can ensure that these tragedies are not repeated. Your work is not only vital, but it's transformative, and it reflects the values we hold as an agency. Our mission is clear: to protect workers, communities, and the environment. And we're not going to waver in our pursuit of chemical safety excellence. As we look to the future, I'm excited about the opportunities ahead. And I believe that the CSB story is still being written, and each of you play a critical role in that next chapter. So thank you for your commitment, your vision, and your resolve. So here's to a year of meaningful progress and impactful outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for those inspirational remarks. And thanks to everyone on the CSB team for their presentations, and to all of you for participating in the meeting and for your questions. One of the things that our presentations underscore is that not only does CSB rely primarily on investigations, some of them full investigations involving interviews and examinations, metallurgy, a variety of analyses, and then others that you saw in the report of the incident reporting. Although they were primarily paper investigations, some of those also involved interviews, as you'll read about in the full report. But all of our investigations, the Volume 1 incident report didn't include recommendations. It really focused on the causes of various incidents. But our full investigations all include recommendations. And it's important to emphasize that the CSB engages in recommendations. We are not a regulatory agency. And as was discussed with the recommendation follow-up, the follow-up is often lengthy, but really relies on dialogue with the recommendees, most of whom are in the private sector, and some of whom are in nonprofit sectors and also the government. And so this recommendation partnership really is intended to promote chemical safety, public safety, worker safety, environmental safety, and it also protects our nation's critical infrastructure and economic capacity. So thank you very much for your engagement in this critical safety process and the CSB's work. Back to you, Steve.
All right, well, thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Sylvia, for those great closing remarks. And I think we're about done, Brian. So I'll turn it back over to you. And again, thanks everyone for joining us. Just a quick reminder that our next public meeting will be on Thursday, April 24th of this year at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And there'll be a notice that'll be sent out about that as well. So again, thank you all for joining us.
Everyone, thank you for attending. This concludes today's business meeting. Thank you.
All right.